All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you guys for jumping on. Like Chandra said, we'll go ahead and get started here. This will be recorded. So for those that are joining and missing the beginning, we'll go ahead and upload this. My name is Will Smith. I am a solutions consultant with Intellius. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself and Intellius here in a moment. But our topic for today is going to be tailoring your hiring process using the Infor configurable hiring workflow. So yeah, with that, we can go ahead and jump in here. Our agenda for today, I'll go ahead and do some introductions. So like I said, I'll tell you about myself. I'll tell you about Intellius. And then I will introduce you to the configurable hiring workflow, tell you about the basics of what that is, what we mean when we talk about the configurable hiring workflow, and why you might be interested in using it. Then we'll jump into the configurable hiring workflow components. So the individual kind of pieces or building blocks that make up this hiring workflow, and what we kind of need to put together to create one of these. Then we'll take a look at a distinct workflows comparison. So the idea here, something we'll be talking about a lot throughout the webinar, is that we might have a need to use different workflows for different types of positions, right? And so what we'll do is we'll kind of compare an example of two different workflows and kind of help illustrate that idea of using different workflows for different situations or different positions or different, hiring streams. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about some of our implementation examples. So some real world clients who we've had use this and go live successfully with the hiring workflow and how that's been helpful to some of our customers. Usually during these webinars, I also will include a live demo at the end. For today, instead of doing that at the end, we're going to kind of sprinkle it throughout the session. I think this hiring workflow is one of those topics that's a little tough to illustrate just by hearing about it or just by seeing a PowerPoint. And so rather than kind of saving it and doing one live demo at the end, as we kind of go through and talk about the different components of the hiring workflow, we'll jump into our demo system and kind of see those components we're talking about within Infor, just to kind of help illustrate what it is that we're actually talking about with these individual components. All right, so a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Will Smith. I am a senior solutions consultant with Intellius. I have both a technical and functional background. So I started back on the technical side, working with IPA and FCU and things like that, and then have been over on the functional side for almost 5 years now, basically helping clients kind of understand and implement different modules and tools and helping them get the most out of the Infor tools that they're using. I've had implementations with many different clients in many different industries, and kind of on the functional side, my specializations are in talent management. So talent acquisition, transition management, and learning and development are the three modules that I've kind of specialized in over on the functional side of things. A little bit about us as a company. So Intellius was established back in 1999. We are an Infor Alliance partner. We have a number of both Infor and AWS certified consultants, and we provide tons of consulting services in the Infor Lawson space, really regardless of the size of kind of the need that you're looking for. We can definitely help with it. So anything from full cloud migrations and upgrades to just a new module implementation, to technical and functional support or training support, to system administration. Really, no matter what it is, all the way from, hey, we need to make a new little IPA flow that does something, all the way up to we're going to do a full implementation and we're moving to the cloud, or anything in between. There's definitely somebody on the Intellius team who has seen it before and done it before and would be happy to help with that. We also have software offerings with our payroll automation, which is now available in multi-tenant GHR, and our expense management. And again, just really, no matter what your need is, if it's kind of in the Infor space or in the Lawson space, definitely something that we can and would be thrilled to help out with. All right. With introductions out of the way, we can go ahead and jump into our topic for today, which is the basics of the configurable hiring workflow. So first off, when we say configurable hiring workflow, or CHW, what do we mean? What am I actually talking about? First of all, I do want to just state that this is delivered functionality within the talent acquisition module. So if you are using Cloud Suite, if you already have TA set up, this is something you have access to and can utilize at no extra cost. It's also something I've seen many clients, maybe you don't have a configurable hiring workflow set up at all, or maybe many clients have, just one that they're using, kind of a very basic, setup. Really, this is something that we can create different versions of for many different needs or many different positions. And so we want to be able to go ahead and use this delivered functionality for those different positions or different needs within our organization. And so that leads into the next piece a little bit. This is, a very flexible tool that does basically enable us to create a unique hiring process for any need we might have. So every organization's hiring needs are going to be different, right? We may have a hospital that hires very differently from a school district, which hires very differently from, a tech company. We've got different positions within those organizations, right? So if we go back to our example of a hospital, right, we might be hiring both doctors and nurses and support staff and administrators. And the hiring process for all those different positions might look very different. We might have different certifications that we need. We might have different rounds of interviews or different interview teams who are interviewing those different people. Some positions we might want to turn over our hiring very, very quickly, right? We might have positions that are very competitive, that we want to, have a very quick and easy hiring process. But we might have positions that are very, sort of complicated, that have many position requirements, and those things might need a longer hiring process with more vetting, with more interview rounds. And so really that is kind of the core of the configurable hiring workflow, is that ability to create different processes for each specific need. And that, again, is not just for, your organization. Obviously different organizations are going to have different hiring processes, but also, again, within a single organization, we can create many different hiring processes to use for the different positions or different needs we have within the same organization. So what is this at its core? We talk about, different needs or different hiring workflows, but what actually is the hiring workflow? Really, it boils down to a set of steps to move candidates through, or a set of, I've heard people call them buckets or inboxes, but a set of kind of steps that we're organizing candidates in as they move through the hiring process. The hiring workflow is recruiter and hiring manager facing. So when we talk about steps that candidates are moving through, these are steps kind of from the recruiter's perspective, right? These are not candidate-facing steps. The candidate is not necessarily going to know what hiring workflow step they are in. These are instead the steps that make up the process on the back end from the recruiting team's perspective that they see as people move through their application. So I did just want to draw that distinction that today we are not talking about the configurable job application. That is something that we'll have another session on here soon. And that the configurable job application that is the candidate-facing piece, right? That is the set of tasks that candidates are filling out to apply as they, put their hat in the ring for the position. What we're talking about today, the configurable hiring workflow, is kind of everything that happens after that application is submitted. So all the steps from, hey, we've got our applicants, all the way down to we're going to go ahead and click the hire action and hire somebody as an employee, or maybe maybe it's a transfer and we move somebody internally within our organization. But again, a set of steps to kind of organize, move candidates along in the hiring process from the recruiter perspective, not necessarily steps that the candidate will see, at least not explicitly. Just want to take a quick look at where this sits within the Infor landscape. Over here under the talent management side of things, we've got the talent acquisition module, and the configurable hiring workflow is part of that talent acquisition module. So it's going to sit over here on the talent management side. It is, like I mentioned, can be both internal and external facing, right? So we'll have external candidates moving through these workflows. We can also have internal candidates applying and moving through these workflows as well. But it is sitting over on the talent acquisition or talent management side of things. Really quick, want to cover the players or the people who are involved with the configurable hiring workflow. First off, we have our candidates. These are external candidates, people who are not yet members of our organization. And these are people using an external web application to apply. So people who are qualified as kind of external candidates who will be moving through the workflow, they are using a login that they're creating via this external web application, as opposed to resources. Like I mentioned, these are sort of internal candidates or people who are already in our organization, who maybe are applying for a different position within the organization, and those people are using employee space to apply. And then really the key players for the configurable hiring workflow specifically are going to be our recruiters and our hiring managers. So these are the people who are actually seeing the workflow steps. Usually the recruiting team is also the people who are designing the workflow steps. And these are the people who are moving candidates through the different steps or through the different buckets as they move along in the process, to kind of indicate where they are within the hiring workflow or within the hiring process for a specific position. So again, I guess another way to kind of break this down based on what we talked about on the last slide, our top two players up here, the candidates and the resources, are going to apply, and their job application is going to kind of move through the hiring workflow, but they will not see the hiring workflow from their end. As opposed to the recruiters and the hiring managers, those are the people who will have visibility into the hiring workflow, who will actually see the steps and be able to move candidates along throughout the process. So now we'll go ahead and take a look at our configurable hiring workflow components, or the individual kind of building blocks or pieces that come together to make up a hiring workflow. And this is where I'll start, like I mentioned at the beginning. We'll kind of jump back and forth between the PowerPoint and the system to see what some of this stuff looks like within Infor. So the first piece, and this is kind of the basic building block, I would say, or the most basic piece of a hiring workflow, really kind of the meat of it or the structure of it, are the workflow steps. So when we talk about a hiring workflow, like I defined at the beginning, we're really talking about a set of steps, right? What steps or what buckets does a candidate or does an application need to move through from the time that they apply until the time that we go ahead and hire them or maybe disposition them. So these steps, again, basically define the hiring process. These are containers for candidate applications. And again, they're visible to recruiters and to hiring managers. So let's go ahead and take a look at that in the system just to illustrate what we're talking about here. I've got our Intellius demo tenant pulled up. and we can go ahead and take a look at one of our existing workflows here. And so we can see, so I'm selected on the selection workflow here. We can see, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, we've got many different workflows set up in our system. But let's use this as kind of our basic example or kind of our standard template of what a workflow might look like. And we can see within the workflow here, I've got all these different kind of gray boxes or gray steps that I can click into from my recruiter view here. So what we're seeing is very similar to what a recruiter or even what a hiring manager might see. And as I'm clicking through these different steps, you can see sometimes I'll get no data available over here on the right, and sometimes I'll get applications. And that is basically telling me which candidates or which applications are in which steps. So I can see, for example, here we've got our partial application step, and I can see we've got some candidates and some applications in here. And this is really showing us, okay, here are the people who have started an application, right? They've come in, they've clicked on our position through the external portal, they've started to apply, but maybe they haven't clicked all the way through the application yet, or they haven't clicked submit. Their application is still in progress. We can see those people here. In our applied under review step, we can see people who have actually completed the entire application and gone ahead and submitted it. And that idea kind of follows all the way down. So we've got different steps that we've defined here as people move through the process, right? We start with, hey, we are partially submitting an application. We fully submitted an application. We go into some screening steps. Maybe we have someone take an assessment. Maybe we have a final review by a recruiter, by a hiring manager, a quick phone screen. We've got some hiring manager review steps down here with a hiring manager interview, some prepare offer steps. So again, many different types of steps, but the idea is just to illustrate there are these kind of buckets or these places that we can move candidates as they move along in the process. So maybe, again, kind of looking at this from a recruiter perspective, maybe this person has fully submitted their application. We've reviewed it as a recruiter. We can go ahead and drag them onward to the next step. And now, they're ready to go ahead and take their assessment. And this basically, again, these are kind of buckets or folders that help us as the recruiter sort and find candidates as they're moving through this process. The process itself defined by the steps that we've created, right, or the structure of these steps. Couple other things I want to really call out or highlight with steps before we move on to the next component. I know I've talked about steps a lot, but again, I think these are kind of the main building block or the most important component of our hiring workflows. We've got different types of steps. So you'll notice I had kind of skipped over our not selected withdrawn step here. But when we talk about our steps in general, kind of our basic type of step, when we talk about like our partial application or applied under review, those are something called recruiting steps. So we can go into our administration here and take a quick look at this. This is kind of from the setup perspective, as opposed to over here where we're viewing it as a recruiter might, once it's actually live, once they're actually using the workflow. But if we go ahead and take a look at our selection workflow here, we will see different step types. So you can see, for example, prospect is a recruiting step. Partial application that we talked about, that is a recruiting step, versus screen out withdrawn is a disposition step. The name is somewhat self-explanatory, but the idea is basically, our recruiting steps, those are steps that are sort of live or active. Those are candidates or applications who we still are continuing to review, continuing to consider, they need action taken on them, right? Maybe they've submitted their application, or maybe they are awaiting a phone screen or something like that. Versus a disposition step is a way for us to kind of say, as we go through the process, this person, maybe isn't the right fit for this position. And then kind of the nice thing about these disposition steps is that instead of just having kind of one big bucket where we, lump all of our people together who, maybe weren't the right fit or were screened out for whatever reason, we can kind of include these disposition steps throughout our workflow to screen out or to disposition those people as we go, kind of in an appropriate place that will tell us information about, where in the process they got screened out, right? So kind of illustrating the difference here between, a screen out withdrawn step, which is, that's our third step here. That's really basically saying you answered something on the application that, is just not doable for this position. So maybe we had a screen out question on the application that said, are you 18 years or older? And we need you to be 18 years old to go ahead and work for us. Maybe we would send you to the screen out disposition step for that reason, right? Or maybe we have are you authorized to work in the United States? We answer no on our application. We might automatically screen out to this really early disposition step, as opposed to, further down here, we've got disposition steps that might be, hey, the hiring manager reviewed this person or interviewed this person, did not think they were a fit, and went ahead and dispositioned them very late in the process, right? Or maybe we have somebody who declined an offer. So we got all the way to the point of, hey, we're going to extend an offer to this candidate, and then that offer was declined. We've got a disposition step very late in our workflow for that reason. So again, that's the idea with the different types of steps, basically just that we can have multiple disposition steps kind of scattered throughout our workflow, so that maybe when we're looking for future applicants or we're looking back on this requisition, we're able to tell the difference between someone who, was screened out immediately because they answered a question wrong versus somebody who was such a good candidate that they made it all the way through to an offer and then they declined that. The last step type we have is a hire type step. Usually there will only be one hire type step per workflow, and this tends to be the last or second to last step in a workflow. A hire type step basically means that we will be able to take the TA hire action on that person or on a candidate when they reach this step. So hire type step basically will be one of the last steps in our workflow. And when someone makes it all the way through all the other workflow steps, and we can look at that from the recruiter view too. So once somebody makes it, all the way past applying and screening and manager review and offer, and they've completed their pre-board, maybe they may land all the way in hire. And the hire step, again, that hire type step is where we would actually be able to right click and go ahead and hire or rehire someone. All right, I think that was what I wanted to cover with steps. So we can go ahead and jump back to the PowerPoint here and take a look at our next component, which is our workflow categories. The workflow categories are basically groupings of workflow steps. So these are, if we think about our workflow steps as the very granular, steps that we want someone to move through, these workflow categories are kind of the larger buckets or the larger groupings of those. So if we go back for a second into the system, we can see these kind of sections that our steps are nested under. And these sections tie back to our categories. So the idea that, hey, within our prospect category, we just have the prospective applicant step, but maybe we've got a category called new for all of our new applicants. But within that category, we've got kind of sub steps or more granular steps, right? The idea that, hey, a new applicant could be somebody who has started to apply but hasn't finished applying. A new applicant could be somebody who applied and was knocked out by the screen out questions. A new applicant could be somebody who has finished applying and is ready for their application to be reviewed. And same idea for screening and for these other categories, right? Under manager review, we've got, hey, here's our hiring manager inbox. This is where all of our candidates are going to land for the hiring manager to take a look at. We've got a hiring manager disposition step and a hiring manager interview step. The idea, again, being that we can kind of group all of our steps within these categories to kind of organize things for our recruiters so that they're focused on, hey, specifically today I'm looking at screening a lot of people for a position, or, the hiring manager wants to see only their steps. They've kind of got those broken out under the categories here. So again, categories are kind of more kind of macro level steps almost, or kind of groupings for the existing workflow steps that we have. Stages of the hiring process is another thing I've seen people call these. So kind of larger phases or stages, and the steps make up kind of the granular pieces of those stages or categories. Again, just like with steps, these categories are going to be visible to recruiters and hiring managers. These are not things that are explicitly visible to candidates, from the candidate view. So this is something that the hiring manager sees or the recruiter sees on their end to kind of help them organize the process and help them move people through the process. If I'm a candidate, I may know, hey, I got an offer, and so I need to go follow up on that. Or, hey, the hiring manager reached out to me and I'm going to have an interview on Tuesday. I may know that stuff, but I won't explicitly be seeing on the candidate side these steps and these categories. All right, the next thing I want to talk about are workflow step actions. So kind of going down one more level, we talked about categories. One more level of granularity beyond that is steps. And then we've got our workflow step actions. These are basically actions that are able to be performed by the recruiters and the hiring managers. Many of these actions are delivered actions within Infor. But the idea here is that Infor allows us to kind of determine within our workflow step setup what actions are available for a given step. So we can kind of limit available actions to recruiters and hiring managers based on the step that a candidate is currently in. So I've got an example here. You can see the prepare offer step has these actions defined where we can, attach a candidate or create an offer letter or define an offer, but we don't, for example, have the schedule interview action under the prepare offer step. And so this is just a way for us to kind of control, when our recruiters and hiring managers are in here working through these workflows. Maybe within the hiring manager interview step, we do want the schedule interview action to appear. But down here on the, prepare offer step, and let's drag someone in there. We may want, this define offer action, whereas we wouldn't want the schedule interview action. So it's a way for us to both, kind of control that, but also kind of make things simpler and easier for our recruiters and hiring managers, right? Where, if somebody's in the prepare offer step, I'm looking to go ahead and do the define offer or the create offer letter action. If somebody's in the interview step, I might be looking to go ahead and take the schedule interview action. And so these workflow step actions kind of let us control, which actions are available on which steps. Setting these up is very simple and easy as well. Within our hiring workflow, if we've got a step, we can go ahead and just double click into that and come to the Actions tab over here on the left. And from here, we can remove actions. So if I were to get rid of this Define Offer action and then go back to that Prepare Offer step and right click, we would no longer see Define Offer there. And we can also add additional actions to these individual steps as well. So if we want to say, hey, we actually do want to allow interview scheduling, or we do want to allow screening assignment, or we do want to allow, all of these different actions, we can go ahead and include those here within our workflow step actions list for that specific step. All right. The next component I want to talk about, and this I think is where we get into some of the really powerful and cool stuff within the configurable hiring workflow, are the workflow step automations. This is basically a way, again, Infor delivered. It does require some setup and some thought on our part to create these, but it's not, to use these workflow step automations, we're not having to create a customization or use configuration console or anything like that. This is all delivered functionality that we can use to basically automate all sorts of different things that may happen when a candidate enters a step or when a candidate is moving through the workflow. So I've seen this used to automatically move candidates between different steps based on eligibility criteria. I've seen this used to, very common use case is to send emails, right? So we might have, on some of those disposition steps we talked about, we might have an automatic disposition email, or on, entering an interview step, we might have an automatic email that goes out with an invite. That's a very common use case. These can also be used to create transition programs. So one that is, again, very common, maybe we have a pre-board step, and if you're an external candidate entering the pre-board step, you're assigned a pre-board program. And honestly, a lot more than that. These workflow step automations can get very, very granular and very, very complicated. But I think, again, are a very powerful tool, a way for us to kind of create a lot of automation, again, without having to use something like IPA or configuration console, without having to lean on development teams or technical teams, just right within the Infor delivered application. We can use these workflow step automations to do some really powerful stuff. And then again, I called out down here, just leveraging eligibility groups to sort candidates, I think is one of the most powerful things you can do within the configurable hiring workflow. So we'll jump back to the system really quick here, and we'll take a look at some of our basic automations that we've got set up. Like I mentioned, one of the common ones we see is to do something like assigning a pre-board program. So we might say at the very end of our hiring workflow, when we enter the pre-boarding step, we might say, if you're an internal candidate, we go ahead and move you to the hire step because presumably you have already been pre-boarded when you started with the organization, right? Maybe you would end up getting a cross-board program or something like that. But if you're an internal candidate, we'll go ahead and move you onward to the hire step because you don't need pre-boarding. Our second automation here says when we enter the step, we are going to go ahead and create a transition program. And the transition program we're going to create is the pre-boarding activities program. So this is basically saying, if I'm not an internal candidate, then as soon as I enter this pre-boarding step, or as soon as I accept my offer, I will go ahead and get a pre-boarding program right to my profile. So that's something I've seen, almost universally. People like to do this, where we can set things up to say, hey, I went ahead and accepted my offer. That means I will move automatically to the pre-boarding step. And then based on our automations here, if I'm external, as soon as I enter that pre-boarding step, I'll get my pre-boarding program out on my profile. And so that can be really powerful, because that can, instead of having someone in HR have to go assign that or something like that, or having it, maybe it takes a while, we can have this kind of immediately fire and say, hey, as soon as you accept your offer through the candidate space, right away you're getting an email that says, congratulations, we're so excited to have you. Please start your pre-boarding program. And you can go back to your same candidate profile that you used to apply, and your pre-boarding program will be out there within 30 seconds of you clicking that accept offer button. So again, that's a simple example of one of these automations, but that's something that I've seen a lot of people do. I think is very powerful. We can also do things like, hey, you've completed your transition program. We go ahead and move you to the higher step. So as soon as you complete your pre-boarding activities, we can go ahead and move you to the next step. And then on the recruiter side, they don't have to, necessarily track your pre-boarding as closely or kind of move you manually when you're ready. They can just wait for you to go ahead and bump onward to the higher step. And then they know, you've completed your pre-boarding activities, because the completion of that program is what caused this automation to go ahead and move you on to the next step. Just for the sake of example, because like I said, I think this is something that can be a little tough to fully illustrate just by talking about it. So let's make just a very simple example automation together. So we talked about the idea of, maybe we want to send an automatic email when someone is screened out. So we could, within our screen out disposition step here, we can go to our automations tab. There's nothing in here yet, but again, no configuration required, nothing fancy. I can just come right in here if I have the recruiter admin role, come to automations, click create, and then it gives me some options here of what to do with my automation. So again, this is kind of a simple one. We're just wanting to send an email when someone is screened out or withdrawals. So we can go ahead and select our workflow action of send email. But you can note in here, there's a lot of different things we can do, right? We can create an offer letter automatically. We can assign screening automatically. We can create an application task. We can create a transition program. We can create a document. We can move to a workflow step. For now, we'll go ahead and say we'll send an email. We'll have that run first because it's the only automation in this step right now. And then we've got different options that kind of are the triggers for these automations. So we can see, like we talked about with pre-board, right? We could do something like, hey, when you complete a transition program, we'll run this. Or when you're leaving the step, we'll run this. Typically, entering step is the easiest one to set up, or at least to understand, just because that's very simple and easy to visualize, right? That means, hey, when a candidate gets dragged into this not selected knockout step, immediately a automation will run because they're entering that step, right? So we'll use entering step for our example here. We'll go ahead and skip the eligibility group for this one, but I'll talk about those more in a minute. And then we can select an email template from all of our recruiting email templates set up within the system. I'll go ahead and just grab our disposition email template and save that here. But basically, just that quick and easy, we've set up an automation to say, as soon as somebody enters that knockout step, as soon as somebody is dispositioned to this step, we'll go ahead and send them an email based on that email template we have set up. We can also do things like delay the email if we want to say, hey, you entered the step and then you get a disposition email 24 hours later or something like that. We can do that as well. The other thing I want to talk about with the workflow step automations is the ability to do a move to step. And this is where, again, I think it can get very powerful and really help take the load off of recruiting teams with sorting and things like that. Something I've seen a lot is basically the idea that we can set up within these steps, step automations that will then maybe move you to a step based on certain eligibility. So I think the simplest example of this would be something like, hey, you enter the applied under review step. We are going to move you to a step if you are internal, right? That's a very easy, simple example. We've got an eligibility group here that basically just says, hey, the candidate type is internal. If that is true, then maybe we move this person forward to, and in this particular workflow, we don't have one, but maybe we have a specific internal candidate review step. For now, I'll say, hey, we'll go ahead and move this person forward to final review. Maybe they skip some of the other steps if they're internal. But again, that quick and easy, we can create an automation here. The other thing with these is that the order is very important, right? With these eligibility groups. And so that's where we get into the nitty gritty of what we've helped a lot of clients do, kind of sorting different candidate types between different buckets. So maybe we've got, a set of automations that run in order, and those kind of help us distribute candidates based on criteria that we, set up within those eligibility groups between different buckets automatically. So that's something that I've seen be very, very helpful for clients in the past. Maybe we've got a step that is kind of our, applied step where, hey, they submit their application, they make it all the way through to this step, and then we have quite a few automations run. Those automations evaluate things about the candidates. Like we said, that could be, are they internal or external? That could be things about their credentials or qualifications, things about the questions that they answered. You can get very, very complicated with those. But again, the idea is that you can kind of have these automations automatically distribute candidates between these steps or between these buckets for your recruiters, so that when the recruiter comes in, they can go in and see, hey, here's all my candidates who automatically got bumped forward to the hiring manager inbox based off all those criteria we defined, right? Maybe we have some criteria that lets you skip the initial phone screen and you go right to hiring manager inbox. So those automations can basically take a lot of that manual sorting or a lot of that manual clicking and dragging out of the equation and kind of sort or distribute candidates appropriately to make things a lot easier for your recruiters and for your hiring managers. All right. I think the last component I had to talk about was the idea of position defaults. This is not something really within the hiring workflow itself, but it is something I wanted to talk about, and we'll get into in a moment a little bit the difference between hiring workflows as well. But you are able to set up on positions default workflows for that position when a recruiter is creating a requisition. So basically the idea there is, if I'm a recruiter and I'm coming in here, creating a requisition and selecting a position code, if I go ahead and select a code here, it's going to default in a bunch of information from that position, things like FTE, salary structure, pay rate, et cetera. But one of the things we can set up our positions to default in is actually the hiring workflow itself. And so this is something that on our positions, we can actually set up which hiring workflow to use. And so then we can, again, like I talked about at the beginning, we can have very different hiring workflows for very different types of positions, right? So here I've got an AP clerk. They might have a very different set of hiring steps from, somebody in management or from, a nurse or something like that. And so the idea is we've got, our set of steps that we've been looking at all throughout today. That does not have to be the one set of steps that we use. So maybe we've got a specific set of steps for different positions. We can go ahead and actually tie those to the positions themselves so that when a recruiter is creating a requisition, they don't even have to think about, hey, what workflow am I going to use or any of that. They can just go ahead and select a position, click, post requisition, and they'll be presented with, when they go view that requisition in the system, they'll be presented with the appropriate set of steps based on the workflow that was assigned to that position. We can also set up a default workflow for the organization as a whole, something that kind of defaults if the position doesn't have a default associated with it. And the other thing to note here is that these can be overridden by recruiters when they're creating requisitions. So we can always set a default that kind of drops in as they're creating these things, but can then be overridden if for some reason they need to use an expedited workflow or something like that for that specific position. So the hiring workflow comparison. This I've alluded to a lot, so let's go ahead and just take a look at it. But again, that idea that, I've talked about setting up these steps and defining this workflow for your specific organizational needs. Well, we can also have lots of different workflows within the same organization. So we've kind of been looking at this selection workflow as kind of our default or example workflow. But let's pretend an example I've seen in the past that we helped with was we had a client who needed to hire tellers, like bank tellers. And that's a very competitive position that people are applying for. And, if they're moved on to the next round or something like that, they're taking jobs very, very quickly. And so this client was having the issue of, hey, we've got this big, long selection workflow. It takes us 4 days to get a candidate through to their first interview. And meanwhile, all of our candidates have already accepted other positions by the time they get there. And so we helped them create something that was kind of similar to this, like an expedited, they called it the same day offer workflow. But you can have something that's much, much shorter. Or even if we go look at this express workflow here, you can have something that has, many fewer steps than what we were seeing over on the selection workflow. So, maybe for a position like that, we really just need, an application, a quick hiring manager review, an offer, and then we get to pre-board and hire. And we take out a lot of those intermediate screening steps or a lot of those intermediate interview rounds. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe we have a job that is, a management position or a position with a lot of responsibility or something like that. And we want, 3 rounds of interviews for that position. And we want multiple people to screen, something like that. We could create a, sort of longer, more rigorous workflow for those types of positions to then be used to make sure, hey, when we're hiring for, our tellers, we are going through our steps. We've got this very short list and we're trying to get people, an offer or an interview by the same day they apply versus our other workflow. Maybe we've got a very long and complicated one where we're going through, maybe instead of just hiring manager review here, we've got, 3 categories that are all review sections. And we're, going through kind of 3 different rounds of interviews with 3 different levels of people or something like that. And so again, that's kind of the idea behind this, or that's kind of what's so powerful about this is we can take everything we've talked about, our steps and our categories and our automations and our actions, and we can design different workflows for different types of positions or different types of people. And again, then we can link those back to the positions. So the recruiters go ahead and they just go in and they say, okay, I'm going to create a requisition for a teller, and they get the express workflow automatically. or I'm going to create a requisition for a new administrator, and our administration workflow defaults in automatically. And so that's really the power of this is that ability to, again, kind of create different sets of steps, different sets of categories, different sets of automations, different emails even, for the different people or the different positions that we need to hire for. I'll go over some of our implementation examples just very quickly. So this is something we've helped a number of clients use since it came out about, I think, 6 years ago or so. We've implemented this with K-12 education, with healthcare providers, with hospitals. We've had a couple power and utility companies use this, as well as a large hospitality organization. So you can see from the spread there, kind of very useful for lots of different industries, right? And again, that idea that like the workflow we built for the power and utility company looks very different than the workflows used by the K-12 education. You know, and some of these organizations might have, you know, 5 or 10 workflows. Some organizations might just need 2, right? Maybe you need a fast and a intensive, or maybe you need, you know, management and a nurse and a doctor and a support staff. You know, it's really up to you, up to your organization. But again, the idea that this is kind of, instead of being like a one-size-fits-all, out of the box kind of workflow, you get to create kind of a tailored custom workflow with the exact steps that you want and that you need for your organization. You get to decide how many steps, you get to decide who sees those steps, what those are called. All of that is stuff that you have control over as you're designing and setting up these configurable hiring workflows. I'll go a little bit deeper into our example for the K-12 education, just because that is a pretty recent one. So this we helped set up for a school district who had about 75,000 students, 100 schools, 10,000 employees, 3,500 teachers, and 1,000 plus candidates a year. So you can imagine, you know, managing all of those different categories or all of those different candidates and sorting them into their correct buckets. It's quite a challenge if you're just doing all of that manually, right? So that was, you know, one of their main challenges was just the sheer volume of candidates, how much load that put on the hiring team, the different types of groups of candidates or positions that they were hiring to, and the variety of job requirements and the variety of hiring processes involved there. So this was a group that I think ended up with 11 distinct workflows for all of their different kind of unique hiring processes. So they did use, you know, our job-specific workflows that we talked about, where they had, you know, a different workflow for teachers than they did for you know, for their support staff. Management had a very specific sort of set of requirements that they needed to follow, right? And so they were able to create a workflow that made sure the recruiters were following that set of steps for management versus the set of steps needed for teachers, and things like that. The other thing that we were able to use the configurable hiring workflow for with this organization was some candidate auto screening, like we talked about with our automations. So that idea that, you know, maybe we've got different buckets of people and we need to sort based on, you know, maybe our union requirements require us to evaluate this group of candidates first based on the fact that they're internal. Or maybe we have some certain certifications or certain education level that we need to check for to even consider a candidate for a certain position. And so we were able to use those workflow step automations and those eligibility groups to build out a system where candidates would apply and then be kind of sorted into distinct buckets based on, you know, their certifications, based on their education level, based on whether they're internal or external, or how long they've been with a district, to make sure that recruiters are kind of reviewing the groups of candidates in the orders that are, needed or required by union agreements. So you can, again, get very, very granular and very, very powerful with the different workflow step automations and kind of the options you have there. Lots of automatic emails as well, right? So we talked about automatic disposition emails. You can also have things like automatic emails for an interview invitation or to get started on pre-board or all sorts of things like that. Basically just automatic candidate communication, taking the load off of the recruiting team to have to manually communicate every step of the process. Instead, we can set up using that workflow step automation candidate communication that happens automatically when somebody moves into or out of a workflow step or when a particular condition is met. And then the other thing we saw this used for, and this was kind of a education sector specific use case, but they do summer school hiring and winter session hiring. The idea being, maybe some people are taking sort of temporary or short-term positions over the summer that are different from their normal, year-round positions. And so we were able to build workflows to handle that application as well, to basically let people, apply internally for these summer school positions that they would then move to temporarily before moving back to their sort of school year position at the end of that session. So a quick summary here, just to kind of go over everything we talked about. So again, the configurable hiring workflow enables you to tailor, customize a hiring process specific to your needs, specific to the needs of individual positions within a single organization. We can have as many workflows as we want within one org based on our need. We can use automatic emails to communicate with candidates without having to rely on our HR and recruiting teams to manually email every time. And of course, we can use our automations to sort and screen candidates according to eligibility requirements that we define. All right, and I will go ahead and pause there. My info is here on the screen. If you have any questions about the configurable hiring workflow, about talent acquisition, transition management, or learning and development in general, always feel free to reach out to me or to anyone at Intellius. And then I will also open it up for questions if we have any for today. I see one question in the chat. It is being recorded and we will post this.
We'll also send out an email with the recording. And so if you don't have any questions right away, you can always respond to that email with questions, or, if you want to go through something that's really specific to your organization, we can set up a call or a meeting to go through options for that as well. We are at the top of the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. But again, if you have anything, you can drop them in this chat or email myself or Will. Both of our emails, he's got his on the screen. I've got mine in the chat. Thanks everyone for joining. It was great to have you on.